Hey guys, before we start, a quick shout out to Alpha Dog Nutrition for sponsoring this podcast. Alpha Dog products are now available at dusupply.com, and you can use code ALPHADOG15 at checkout for 15% off and a credit for free shipping to try it yourself. Now let's get you to your podcast.
Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
Welcome to the Gone to the Dogs podcast. Steve Fielder, your host, with you one more time. Through the miracle of Al Gore's internet, we're able to come to you out there into your devices, be it your cell phone or your computer at home or whatever you choose to listen with. And today have a great guest, young man that I just met. Have not actually had the opportunity to shake his hand, but I look forward to doing that soon. And he came to me with a couple of questions through, I believe, Messenger on Facebook, and piqued my interest. And I said, man, that will make a good podcast and a good conversation for a podcast. Before we get started any further and before I introduce our guest, I want to thank my friend Buddy Woodbury at W Hunting Supply, and Jason Doobie, who's always been my go-to guy out there. Thank them for their sponsorship of this podcast. I also want to thank Alpha Dog Nutrition. Their supplements will help that dog of yours perform its very best. And also my good friend, longtime friend, a guy I really look up to, literally, Mark Zepp with Zepp Predator Calls, who has been a stalwart, constant supporter of this podcast ever since we started. Okay, that's it for the commercials. I want to welcome to the Gone to the Dogs podcast microphone, Mr. Nite Hickson from, he tells me he lives in Mercer, Pennsylvania. Is that right, Nate?
That's right, Steve.
Yeah, man. Well, it's great to have you on today. And we're going to talk about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because if I peel back all the years that I've been involved in these dogs, from an organized standpoint, and probably from the standpoint of giving me the background I needed for my career, was working in a local coon club, conducting field trials and water races. And that's what our subject's going to be today. But first of all, we need to get to know Nate a little bit. Nate, you're a young man, I see. How old are you?
I'm 26 years old.
26. Well, let's see. 3, 6, 18, 36. You are exactly a third of my age.
Wow.
Yeah. Now you know why I sound like I've had a flu bug all week long, man, and it's just, it wasn't a respiratory thing, but I guess just laying around, tossing and turning and drinking liquids, nothing interesting, just juices and such. But anyway, I'm not in the best of form for this today, Nate, but I do feel pretty good, and I feel great about you being on. All right, so you live in Mercer, PA. Are you a student? Are you working? What do you do in your spare time?
I run my own dog training business.
Dog trainer.
I'm a dog trainer, yes, sir.
We'll have to get you and Heath Hyatt on here at the same time. Have you listened to Heath's podcasts?
I have listened to some with Heath.
Okay, good. Well, I've got a soon-to-be 7-month-old plot pup here in the house that could definitely use your skills, I'm sure. But, okay, well, tell me, how'd you get involved in that? That's interesting.
Well, it kind of started. I had a hobby where I was really into aquariums, and I would breed fish, and I was raising a fish, and I was raising a fish for a show down in Texas. So I was gonna fly down in Texas with my fish and enter them in a big competition. Well, that was right before COVID struck, and so I didn't end up making it down to the competition. COVID kind of canceled it. Well, around that same time, I was dating a girl, and we were gonna I was like, "Oh,
there's always a girl involved in these
one,
stories."
yeah.
And by the
And
way,
so-
folks, we're recording this on Valentine's Day, and if you're still able to listen and set up and take nourishment, as my friend in Michigan said, you apparently remembered Valentine's Day and took care of that girl in your life. But at any rate, I'll quit interrupting now, Nate. Go ahead.
Well, long story short, we got the dog, and it didn't last much longer. So she took the dog, and I was dogless. So I said, "Well, what do I do now?" And so that's how I ended up in the dog training field. Was I was really into researching and getting stuff together, and we had gotten a mini dachshund, and so I wanted to make a versatile mini hunting dog, mini dachshund, and a pet. And so I didn't have that anymore, but I had all this interest in dogs. And at the same time, I wasn't in a position to get a different dog. And so I called around, and I got a job working at a kennel as a kennel tech. And this is police dog kennel. So they had 150 kennel runs, and they would import dogs in from Europe and run trainer schools. This was a very fancy operation. So that really exposed me to the dog training professional field. And since then, I've done work, and I've done some shelter work, and I've kind of moved out and started doing my own thing. But yeah, now I just run a business. I mostly do pet dogs and run a business doing that.
I see. So if a person has a dog, well, let me just kind of think of the options here. You've got a puppy, maybe, that you want to obedience train. Maybe do you even delve into things like potty training and stuff like that? Or do you just get into more the handling of the dog, the socialization? Kind of what are the different disciplines there that you deal with?
Oh, if it wags its tail, I'll touch it as long as the person's willing to pay me. So there's not much I wouldn't do, but I guess it just depends on the person, their goal. So I take each client on as an individual. I take their dog on as an individual, and I try to meet their goals. So
do you go to their homes, or do you have a facility there that they come to you?
Right now, the way I operate my business is I travel to them, so it's very convenient for my customers.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like fun. Well, when you mentioned that big kennel with all those imported police dogs and all, you'd be right down Heath Hyatt's alley, because I think he manages 12 or 13 police canines for various police departments there in Virginia. And that's what his day job is. And then, of course, he hunts bear. And I think that's about it now, mostly bear hunting. But Heath and I have been friends for a long time, and proud to say that he's also on the W Hunting Supply Network with us and has his weekly podcast. Usually they drop on Wednesday. So you and Heath are definitely going to have to get together. But well, okay, so I know that you also have ventured over into the realm of the coonhounds, and tell me a little bit how you got involved in that.
Well, the first time I ever saw a coonhound run, I was in the 5th grade, and I had an uncle that had bought a blue tick, and he was getting his blue tick started, and he'd bring me along. And at the same time that was going on, I had a teacher that started reading us Where the Red Fern Grows.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So I was
is.
like, I had the double mix. I was reading the book, but I was also going out, and each night, I'd come back and I'd tell a coon hunting story. Then she would start reading the book. And so it was fun to be that. Well, I was never allowed a coonhound, though, because they smell. We grew up with retrievers. So, I always had a retriever in the house, and they were like, "Oh, you should just train that dog to coon hunt." Well, it never came much of that. Never came much of that.
People outside our sport just don't understand that, do they? You know, in fighting for dog owners' rights for so many years in the registries, the people out there, a lot of them believe that you can just go, so why do you need to breed dogs? You know, they wanted to ban the kennel, the backyard kennel, and disallow us from breeding our own dogs. The pounds and the rescue centers are full of dogs. Just go get yourself a dog and take that one and go hunting. They don't understand, do they?
They definitely do not understand. And so, you know, I never got my coonhound then, but you know, when last year I'm 25 years old and I'd been a dog trainer and I'd been part of the Coon Hunters Club Facebook page, the Mercer County Coon Hunters Association. And I saw a thing for a meeting, and then afterwards they were going to have a buddy hunt. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. I should go out for that and see what it's all about. And so I made my way out to the meeting and I made my way out to the buddy hunt. And then they said, oh, come back this weekend. We're going to have a big event. So I came back for the big event. And then, you know, a month passed. I went to the next meeting, the next buddy hunt. And then at the end of that meeting, Corey Groover comes out and he has a puppy and he says, hey, we're having a big event on Saturday. Come on out. We're going to raffle off this dog. We're raising money. We're going to buy a service dog. This was our Wags for Kids event last year in July.
I remember it well. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So when the Wags for Kids thing came around, Bill Schinninger put up a puppy for us as an item to auction off to raise money. Well, I came out and I'd seen the puppy on the Tuesday meeting before, and then I was like, oh, I'll put my name in the hat. I'll see if I can win myself this coon hound, and that's how I got myself a nice plot hound.
Well, you got the right breed.
I certainly did.
Some of my listeners will disagree with us, Nate, but plots have been my family's breed, you know, since back in 1954. So it's more than 70 years now. But, well, that's great. And I remember we participated in that stud dog auction that was part of that Wags for Kids, I believe, or was that something different? That
was the same event.
Same event.
Yep, that was a big event for the club.
Right, and we enjoyed that, and we're real honored that our fever dog got in the top 5 stud dogs, and they sent us a nice little plaque, and I have it right here in my office, and I'm very proud of that. But, well, great. So you got a plot female. How old was she when you got her?
She was 12 weeks old when I got her.
I see. Well, okay. So you brought her right in the house, or did you still hang on to those old family ways that coon dogs don't belong in the house?
She came right home with me. I actually was preparing. I was preparing to start into another dog sport and get a puppy for another dog sport. And so getting this plot hound kind of changed my path. I was planning to have a Malinois puppy for a dog sport called Mondio Ring.
Now, I don't know a thing about that. Tell me real quickly what that's about.
Mondio Ring is a protection dog sport.
Okay.
So it's split into 3 phases, obedience, jumps, and protection. And there's 3 levels of dog, level 1, level 2, level 3. The level 1s compete. Once you earn your title of level 1, you can move up the levels. So yeah, they go through. I would consider it the most difficult dog sport in the sense that the dogs wear no equipment. So when you enter the field, you take your collar, your leash off, and you hand it over to the judge. So the dog is naked, and it's a 45-minute routine. But the routine isn't a pattern. So a lot of other protection dog sports are patterned. So the dog sees the trial picture over and over and over again. Where in Mondio Ring, the day of the event, the judge has what's called the dog in white, where the dog in white is like the demonstration. They show the handlers what the dog in white does, and then it's your turn to trial and take the same go through the same trial as the dog in white.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. You know, when I was with the United Kennel Club way back, I've always been a coonhound guy, and we're going to talk about some of those beginnings as we, get on to our subject here. But, one of the things that we did at the time that I was there, the Gaines Dog Food Company, now the older people will remember Gaines. They were the ones that came out with a dog food called Gravy Train. You could put water on it and it would make gravy on top of the kibble. And Gaines Meal and so forth. They were a big company. I mean, a grocery store company like Purina, for instance, or Eukanuba or whatever. But they held a big obedience trial each year. And this one particular was held in the Chicago area. And for the first time, I went and sat in the bleachers and watched these dogs go through all these obedience paces, where they're given so many points, about 200, I believe. And if they made a mistake, a point or a half a point, whatever was taken away. And I saw some of the most amazing dogs that I'd ever seen in my life. A lot of them were golden retrievers. A lot of them were Shelties, Shetland sheepdogs, border collies, dogs that were extremely intelligent. And it began to expand my horizons. I knew about working dogs, sheepdogs, and police dogs and all this. But it's an amazing world out there. And is there literally anything except maybe, walk on water and talk on TV that you can't teach a dog to do? They're amazing creatures.
Well, I'll tell you a good story. I had a lady one time, and she told me, I said, what's your goal with your dogs? And she told me, she said, I want them to be able to do everything I tell them the first time, but I don't want to force them to do anything. That's what she had told me. And I told her very clearly, hey, I want your dog to be able to talk and solve crimes like Scooby-Doo too. But that's not how this works. So that's what I introduced her to the reality of dog training.
There you go. And some people don't really get it, do they?
They certainly don't. A lot pet dog owners are their own breed.
Right. It used to always tickle me up. People say, Fluffy, why did you chew up the remote? I told you not to chew the remote because, that's not good for you and it's a bad thing. So now you're a bad dog because you chewed up the remote. And Fluffy's looking, well, I heard bad in there. I heard dog. But that's about it, But, anyway, you're the expert in that field. I am not. I have trained many, many coonhounds over the years, and I had one of the smartest dogs I ever had was a plot hound named Hoss, and he's the grandsire of the fever dog we have now, and great-grandsire to my ghost puppy that I have here in the house. And but I taught him basics, and he just seemed to catch it like, he was way more than smart. Do you notice that with some of the dogs, that they just have superior intelligence to others, or are they all pretty much the same?
Oh, absolutely. Temperament and genetics matter. Good training can take you so far, but a good dog will take you further, for sure.
Yeah. And once you've had a dog like that, you want another one. That's for sure. But, well, okay. Well, when you text me the other day, you asked me about why I didn't do a podcast on field trials and water races. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that really kind of struck a nerve with me. I've talked about them somewhat on the podcast over the last 5 years that I've been doing these, but never really devoted a podcast to that subject. So I want to kind of give you a crack at me here and let you, ask me any questions that you want. And then I'll try to relate some experiences and some stories and things, and perhaps you have some too that would be interesting to our listeners. What did you have in mind when you asked me that, Nate?
Well, I was kind of curious the origin of the field trial and the water race, right? When did they come to be? When did they start to become organized events? When did they start to be picked up by the registry? Questions like that.
Aha. Well, you came to the right source, because there was an old TV show called Laugh In. It's much too old for you to remember. And it says, here's the news across the nation. We have got the information. So I happen to have that information for you. Back in 1997, UKC, when I was there as a vice president, we published a centennial book, 100 years. It's called The First 100 Years. And in that book, I went back, as well as several other people involved, and dug out a lot of the history about these things. And, of course, the field trial was really the forerunner of today's night hunt. But at one time, it was the only thing that the coon hunters had in terms of a competition, where they could pit one dog against another and see, which one was the winner. And for UKC, the first actually publicized field trial. Now, we should divide this first and clarify for our listeners real quick that a field trial is a simulated track and tree on the ground, on dry land. A water race is performed in the water. They each have a starting point. They each have a home tree with a lure in the tree. But one is conducted on land, one on the water. And that's the basic differences of the two. But anyway, it was in 1924 when the first publicized coon dog field trial was held. What state would you think it would have been held in?
I'm going to guess the state, Georgia.
Georgia. Okay. Well, actually, it was in one of your neighboring states, the state of Ohio. It was in Marion, Ohio. And then in 1927, they got real organized with this thing, and they held what they called the first leafy oak field trial, and that became what was known as the Kenton National. Now, the Kenton National actually was the forerunner of Autumn Oaks. You've heard of Autumn Oaks, the Labor Day event that UKC has. So anyway, so that's when they actually started, was back in 24, and then they had the first large event in 1927. And back then, most of the dogs were what we call grade dogs. They weren't registered. They were primarily crossbreds. The purebred coonhound strains really weren't that popular back in that day. But anyway, that's when the first one, there was a dog named Bones that won the first organized field trial, and he was a blue tick. And you mentioned the blue tick earlier. So old Bones was a blue tick, and he was a good-looking dog. If you saw him, he was more of, as I wrote in an article in this book, I said, by carefully analyzing the photograph of Bones as compared to the other country coon dogs of that era, one can begin to see the emergence of the coonhound athlete. he had that deep chest, tight gut, up on legs appearance that you see in competition hounds today. And this was written in 1997, but the article about Bones was written 74 years before that. So that was a long time ago. But anyway, that's when the field trials first began, and they were really big. And this is kind of funny. They called them crap sack races because they would take coon manure and put it in a burlap sack and soak it in the creek, I imagine, or a barrel, whatever. And that's what they would use for their scent, the trail that they would use. And they would drag that, over hill and dale. And then I imagine they had a coon in a cage. I'm supposing that they did at the end of the trail. And of course, the terms line and tree came into vogue. The dog that won by crossing the finish line ahead of the other dogs was the line winner, and the one that barked first when he reached the tree was the tree winner. And they generally had a circle around the tree, and the dog had to be inside that circle for his tree bark to count. And that's the same as it is today. But these events are kind of experiencing a resurgence. Why? Do you have any idea why?
I think just so people can get the title on their dog.
Well, the titles have always been an incentive for people. And, my partner on this plot dog that we have, which he's a half-brother to your dog, he was very interested in not only night hunts with Fever and the bench shows, but he wanted to do the field trials and water races too. And he really enjoys them. And the dog, as before he was 3 years old, he was a quadruple grand champion. But I don't want to talk too much about him. This is not an advertisement for that dog. But as I've been following our dog's progress, it's kind of rekindled in me an interest in these events because my partner Mark always sends me videos. He videos the finish, on the field trials. He shoots the swim races and all those things, so I can sit at home and watch those things. And it's a great spectator sport. It really is. Now, the field trial end of it, you only see the dogs as they come across, come into view and come into the home tree. But the swim race, you can pretty much watch all of it. But what I was getting at about the resurgence is that I'm believing, from what I see and hear and the trends that have been over the last few years, places to hunt free-ranging, free-casting coonhounds are becoming fewer and fewer, unfortunately. If you're lucky to live in an area with a lot of woodland or a lot of farmland that's available, then you are very lucky because a lot of parts of the country don't have that anymore. And these contained events where, you can control the dogs within a given area are definitely going to become popular once, places to go out at night. And also they're great for kids as a gateway into the sport. They're great for the ladies that may not cherish getting out there and, tramping around through the swamps and briar patches at night. So I just think that the loss of hunting land is going to contribute to the popularity of these events once again. Does that make sense?
That does. And I was going to add maybe the aging coon hunter, maybe it's a little easier to get out and put your dog into a trial, into a water race, instead of getting into the night hunts.
Yeah, and, I have had to face that reality. I enjoyed always competing with my dogs at night, and I loved the rigors of coon hunting. I don't know about today with the dogs they have. They're treated to 4 points of the compass, and each one of them is a mile away. I'm not so sure I would enjoy getting out there and doing all that walking. But I did enjoy the athletic part of coon hunting. But at 78 years old, that's history for me now. You just simply can't do it for an extended period of time. Now, I still pleasure hunt. I still go out with my buddies, and every once in a while they have to help me out by getting a dog maybe that's a little bit far or a little bit in a difficult place. But, yeah, exactly. The older hunters tend to do that, to resort to the night hunts and the field trials. But there was a time after this inaugural event in 1924, all up through, things kind of slowed down during World War II. But after World War II and all the guys came back home and all these events became very popular, all across the Midwest. Big states were Ohio and Illinois and Indiana, Missouri. I'm sure there were some in Pennsylvania. And the money races became popular. And they were 3 divisional races. They would have a heat with 6 dogs. And the top 2 dogs that finished in that heat would be Division I dogs. The second 2 would be Division II dogs. And the third 2 would be Division III dogs. So then when they came to run the semifinal, the Division I dogs would run only against other Division I dogs. So it gave the dogs that maybe weren't the fastest in the race an opportunity to compete at their own level. And that brought on some interesting aspects of the sport that I don't know if it's still going on or not, but people found ways to game the system, so to speak, through drugs and stimulants and depressants and all those things. And there are many stories to be told about that, but all across the Midwest, the field trials were very popular. And that Kenton National held on Labor Day weekend in Kenton, Ohio, it would go all night, go 24 hours. And then when the water races became popular, that became even easier because they would swim dogs all night long. It was like a 3-ring circus, man, that never shut down.
Do you know what year the UKC picked up the water races?
Yeah. Okay. Let me see here. The year that they actually, let me see here. That's a good question, and I have it here somewhere. They say that the first publicized was in 24, and the Leafy Oak was in 27. So they picked them up. Okay. Let's see. I should have that. I would say in the 30s. Probably about 1935 or so is when they really got into supporting them and licensing them and advertising them in their coonhound blood. Actually, there was no coonhound bloodlines back then. It was just bloodlines. And there was an article that talked about the dogs in 1935. Excuse me a moment. But there was a lot of pushback by the purists in the coon hunting world. And it's kind of interesting. There's a paragraph here that I think I'll read and share with our listeners, because one of the earlier breeders of purebred coonhounds was a guy named Hans Wagner. And he was actually had an interesting job. He was a window dresser. He put together the window displays for department stores and so forth that used to be very popular. Believe it or not, we didn't have Google and the internet, back in those days in the 30s. And but Mr. Wagner began to breed a faster, more agile, taller, sleeker, athletic type black and tan, because the dogs before that had always been big, cumbersome, shorter legged, longer eared, slower on trail. So there's speculation that he bred Doberman into his dogs or whatever. And that has not been proven, and I don't know. But through selective breeding, he was able to breed a black and tan of the type that we see today. And you have Dave and Kelly Myers there in Pennsylvania that has some absolutely gorgeous black and tans. And they're athletic type dogs for sure. But here is a coon hunter's view of the field trials. These dogs are in no way related to the old-fashioned. He's talking about his dogs. Okay, no, wait a minute. I've got the wrong quote. He's talking about. Oh no. I'm right. Okay. Rewind the tape. These dogs are in no way related to the old-fashioned, slow, ye olden time, dull-witted, extremely long-eared, rusty-colored, black saddle, 2 dogs long and a half a dog high, run all night in a 10-acre lot type. These are purebred black and tans, while no relation in any way, shape, or form to any ye olden time strains. We have always bred the best to the best, and by this we mean genuine old coonhounds that have won their spurs out in the big woods and water country, treeing wild coons in all kinds of rough weather. Not mongrels that have won their championships, whatever that means, over a Tom Thumb golf course on a warm Sunday afternoon, running a 20-minute old coon drag, which any parlor poodle can do, as is evident by many of the field trial champions. So his opinion of field trials was not very high. And I believe that was shared by a lot of the hunters that actually, liked to hunt at night and thought that these trials were a bunch of foolishness. But they were very, very popular and continued to be that way for many, many years. And, all the clubs up in Michigan when I was there had field trials and water races in conjunction with their coonhound events, where in other parts of the country, a lot of the clubs just discontinued them and held only night hunts and bench shows. Are you seeing many field trials up your way in Pennsylvania?
No, not field trials. Our club is starting to get our water race ready. We haven't had a water race or field trial in over 30 years for both of them. But we're trying to get a water race set up for our plot hound event in August.
Good. Well, August is a good time. When I went to Michigan, I was pleasantly surprised to see that many of those older established clubs up there had quite elaborate water race pits. Some of them were concrete tanks, like a swimming pool, but long and narrow, and with chain link fence around where the spectators could see the dogs swimming or follow them as they swam up the pond, and then of course the one club that I belonged to, there was a huge oak tree at the far end, and so it was a big spectator thing. And over in Ohio, when I went to the UKC and we rebuilt the coonhound program there, I went there in 2004, and we wanted to have a world championship water race. And we found a facility near, I think that's called, I can't remember the name. It starts with a C, and it'll come to me in just a minute. It's kind of on the intersection of Interstate 75 and 70. It's right on the end of my tongue, and I can't think of it. But these folks had built a pond, a long, narrow pond, and then they built bleachers all along I would say, the first third to almost half of that pond alongside. And they had a tower, or starting tower, where the announcer stood, and he could watch the race, and he could call, pretty much, it's kind of like a drag strip. It looked like a drag strip, but it was a water tank. And we held the world championship swim races there. And we had a great time with that. And I don't know if that facility is there still or not, but it's right off the interstate. You could see the highway from the grounds. Did you ever hear of that place?
I have not heard of that.
Yeah. I'll think of the name of the town. It starts with a C. It's right there at the junction of 70. That might be 77 and 70. But at any rate, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. But that brings back a lot of memories for me, Nate, because when I was a kid in my coon club, I was secretary of the club when I was in high school. And one of my responsibilities was to put on the water races in the field trials, and that was to get the volunteers together, order the trophies, make sure there were refreshments there, and all that. So that's kind of where I got started in this madness of coon and coon hunting and so forth. Well, any questions about the field trials before we kind of move on here a little bit?
Have they always been dominated? We talked about crossbreeds historically. Once it became the coonhound breeds, has it always been dominated by a particular breed?
Well, it's interesting. When they started out way back in the day, the red bones were king. Mm-hmm. Some of the earliest winners of these trials were red bone dogs. And, here we go. In 1935, let's see. Dayton Danger, a red bone, was noted in the April 1935 issue of Bloodlines to have earned 45 points toward his degree of champion. Another grade of the day was a red bone by the name of Payday, who was killed by a train in February of 1935. But the red dogs figured real heavily in the early days. See, the black and tan was the oldest of the breeds to be registered by UKC. And then the red bones and the English coonhounds. But within the English coonhounds, there were two types that were registered as English, but later became their own breed. And that was the blue tick and the treeing walker. So all of this expansion then came about 1945, 1946, when the plot dog became an accepted breed. The blue tick was moved out of the English breed and became its own breed, and the treeing walker the same. So, so you had then the black and tan, the red bone, the treeing walker, the blue tick, the English, and the plot, which comprised the 6 breeds that were recognized for many years, and until the American leopard hounds came along fairly recently. But the red bones were, but see, the walkers had not become popular at that point. The walkers were still foxhounds, chiefly in Kentucky, and as the dogs within those foxhound packs began to tree, maybe slowed down by older age and so forth, guys just started developing them for coon hunting. And then, after World War II, when the guys came back and they devised these sets of rules for competing at night, the speed of those foxhounds came to the front. And they became very, very popular, although, up until that point, it was a lot more common to see the red bones or the black and tans or maybe the blue ticks as, being the more popular. But the Nite Hunts are what put the treeing walker dog on the map and quickly moved them to the front, in popularity. Okay, have we shined that tree fairly well?
I have another question.
Yeah.
About why hasn't there been an organized effort to make treeing contest official coonhound sport?
That is a good question, and I guess simply, I don't know of anybody that's comprised a set of rules for treeing contests. I know, they vary in length, and over the years ago, they were always a minimum of a minute long. And in more recent years, I see the 30-second tree come about. Mm-hmm. I rather think because it's somewhat of a judgment call, because you simply have to take the word of the judges as to how many barks they counted. Now, back in the early days of the Nite Hunts, the judging was all subjective. You took 4 dogs out, you turned them loose, there was a judge, he picked the dog he liked the best. No rules. That's just the way it was. They soon found that they needed a set of rules, a scorecard, so to speak, that, where they could see, hold in their hand and see which dog outperformed the other. And that's how the Nite Hunt rules came about. So I'm thinking probably by the fact that, we've got Joe over here counted 65 barks. Tom over here counted 64. And Bill over here only counted 53. It was all subjective. And how can you put, I said this many times when I was at the registries. Records was our business. That's the only product we had to sell. That's why the registries are so careful, or tried to be careful, with the pedigrees on these dogs to make sure the information was correct. And there was a time when they were strictly at the mercy of the hunter. If you and I attempted to register a litter of puppies, and we said that the sire was old handy and the dam was old ready, then the UKC had no recourse but to accept our word for that. But then when the puppy programs came about, which rotated on the dog's age or centered upon the dog's age, and they had to be between this age and that age in order to participate, there needed to be a way to verify that. And that's when the DNA profiling came along. And we're able to determine the age of the dog. And so, everything needs to be verifiable. So it'd just be more difficult in treeing contests, I think. But most clubs do have them, and they're a good little fundraiser for a club, and they're also good for the kids, and they're fun. We've enjoyed participating in the treeing contest with Fever. He won the Grand American treeing contest when he was just, I think, about 7, 8 months old, something like that. But it's just, it's a fun thing to do. Do you enjoy them?
I do. Yeah, my dog placed third at the most recent one, 39 barks to the winner at 57. But the winner had a good chop, and I came out bawling. So that's how they got there.
Yeah, that's it, because that's the key. They count the barks. But now there are treeing contests where they count the misses, or the periods where the dog goes quiet. Mm-hmm. And so that gives the ball mouth dog a better chance, because the ball mouth. How many times you go to a treeing contest and you see somebody bring out a little old pup about 4 months old or something, yeah, and just, blisters it. And I have a treeing contest story, and I've told it before. I probably shouldn't tell it again, but I'll be real brief. Had a dog one time, took him to his first treeing contest. He barked 63 barks in 30 seconds. And he beat the local legend, a big Walker dog that was always the winner. Excuse me. So, I thought, man, I have the be-all, end-all treeing contest dog. So the next week I took him to a trial in another town. They had the coon up a pole in the park, in the lot there at a small fairground. I lined him up. They blew the whistle. I cut him loose. He went and wet down the pole and took off. That was his last treeing contest.
That's funny.
He was one and done. But
here's a question.
Yeah.
Do you think the use of an artificial lure versus a live game, do you think that has a big factor in the commonality of the events, the field trials, the water races, the treeing contests?
Well, you mean as far as do more of them use an artificial lure than a live lure?
Right. I guess questions about the history of that, how the registries see it now, and the use, the modern usage. What's commonly accepted now?
Commonly accepted now is a lure of some kind. Often said it's a shame you got to kill the coon and stretch his hide before you can use him in a treeing contest. All of that came by public opinion, animal rights, not liking to see the coon, quote unquote, being harassed. There's a real vivid, I guess I'd use the word history in coonhound events, and I don't want to go into a lot of it because some of it really needed to be changed, okay, because there were a lot of events that were held back in those 30s and 40s, maybe even into the 50s, that were not humane.
Mm-hmm.
So most states now, though, require the contest to be conducted with some kind of an artificial lure. I've seen people put stuffed kids' toys sprayed with coon scent in the cage. I've seen, of course, pelts. Some of them are tan, some of them are just green hides. And there are still a few states, I think, around that permit a live coon to be used. But the registries taking the high road and tired of the flack, I guess, pretty much submit that it has to be a lure. I think, now I could be entirely wrong. I know if there are clubs holding, even though a treeing contest is not a licensed event, the field trial and water race are. And they do use some type of animal or lure at the tree. So I'm going to say UKC still permits it where the law permits it. And if the state law says you cannot use a live animal, then of course they don't. Follow?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think it affect? I thought your question was going to go to this end. That do I think it affects the dogs using a lure rather than a live animal? And I would say in certain individual cases, maybe. But for the most part, no. If you've done any training with a live coon and you turn the coon loose, often as not, the dogs will tree on that empty cage the same way they would if there was an animal in there. And the reason they do that is the scent's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're keying on. But okie doke. Good questions. Good questions. The water races, I don't know exactly where they originated, but I'm going to say in Ohio again. We didn't address that particularly in the book, in the Centennial book, but it was pretty much at the Leafy Oak there in Ohio that became Autumn Oaks. And at one time, I think Autumn Oaks did have water races, but that requires a lot of help. You got to have somebody, that helps enter the dogs, gets them into the right heat, gets them to the starting box, make sure everybody's in, make sure they all get the same signal, that the door opens at the same time, that the dogs all swim free and clear of the boundaries, that they don't foul the other dogs by, trying to swim on top of another dog or things like that. So, the judges play an important part. So there are some logistics there. Most of the clubs use a system, or it depends on how long the pond is, but I've seen them like down at the American Plot Association events on their dash races. They have a dash race that's very popular. And basically what the dogs do is chase a four-wheeler that's dragging a bearskin across a field. And it's basically just, a dash race, whoever crosses the finish line first and whoever trees up the tree first. And it's held in a location that's very visible. And so a huge crowd, can watch the whole process. It's kind of like watching horse racing, but just games to play with our dogs to, enjoy them in all the ways that we can. Have I talked your ear off?
No, Steve, I'm just listening. It's very interesting to hear the history of all this.
Well, water racing, there are two kinds of dogs that are involved. The UKC racers are only for licensed or registered, registered coon hounds of one of those 7 breeds. But if you go down to the St. Jude Coon Hunt in Parsons, Tennessee in April each year, it's a big event that benefits St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, you'll see the old-style water race, where the dogs there could be any description. Many of them are greyhound crosses, lab crosses, labs themselves. And one of the signs of a, what we'd say, a bona fide water race dog would be usually they're wearing an ear sock. Are you familiar with those?
I'm not sure. I think I know what you're describing.
Okay, they put a nylon sleeve over the dog's head.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it keeps the ears pressed firmly against the skull. And that keeps the water out of the dog's ears and keeps the dog from shaking his head to get the water out while he's swimming, because usually when they shake their head, they stop or they decrease their strokes. So in order to prevent the dog from shaking his head, they put a sock on it. And that's very typical that and you see those, I believe, I'm not sure if they're legal or not in the licensed races. I should know that. But I've been away from them so long that I don't know. But anyway, that's one of the things. Now, one of the things that UKC does not permit is muzzles in field trials or water races. Where you go to some of these grade money races, the likes of the Kenton National and races like that, you'll see dogs wearing muzzles. Because quite honestly, they don't know how to play nice. And so they put a muzzle on. But those muzzles, if a dog's there at the tree throwing its head one way or the other, it could injure another dog with that muzzle. So muzzles are not permitted in licensed water races or field trials. So that's just another little nuance of the sport there. But I don't know. There's been a lot of stories, a lot of, as I said when we were back in West Virginia, there's a place called Bass Lake on New River, and it was a summer swimming attraction for folks there and all. Well, our club and maybe an adjoining club would hold a water race there each summer. And we would post it in Full Cry and American Cooner magazines, and we would get entries from all over the Midwest. And we ran what we called a 3-division race, which I described earlier. And there was money involved. If you were the final winner, Division I, you might make $300. maybe 200 for Division II and 100 for one. And sometimes it would be more than that. But when that race was over and we'd walk around the grounds cleaning up everything, that's when we realized that these guys were drugging the dogs. There were vials, there were needles, there were pill bottles. And I never watched it done, but I have been told that the idea was if you had a dog that was real fast and you knew he'd qualified Division I, but you had a better dog, you didn't really want him to be your Division I dog, so you might slow him down a little bit and make him come in Division II or III. And then when he got to the final, then that's when the amphetamine or whatever came in. And I don't condone, I'm not laughing about it because it was horrible on the dogs. It wasn't fair, but, without registry control, that's what you get sometimes. But so that's just all of tell it like it is, Nate. It is what it is. But I don't know. I don't go to those kind of races anymore. I don't know if any clubs are still holding those kind. I know certainly the UKC races are not conducted that way because there is a director there that's overseeing all that and making sure it's all, on the QT, on the, not QT, but on the up and up, So, all righty. We pretty much shined the tree, as so to speak, on field trials and water races. We've been at it here about an hour and 6 minutes, and I'm afraid that I've done most of the talking, but I guess you wanted me to answer some questions, so.
Oh, I got my questions answered today, and I appreciate it.
Well, let's see now. Let's talk a little bit about the Mercer County Coon Hunters, because I think you guys are doing a phenomenal job over there. And you're always having something going on, just like the WAGs for kids. And now you've just had a big weekend here, just this past weekend, right?
It would have been 2 weeks back now.
Okay.
Yeah, we had our midwinter jamboree, which was a big, just a show, an RQE show. We had 37 dogs enter.
That's awesome. In today's climate, that is awesome.
Yeah, so that was very cool. I helped out with that show, and so that was an opportunity. That was a good opportunity for me to meet everybody too, meet all the local dogs, local people. A lot of people traveled in, so it was a good opportunity.
Well, Carrie Groover, who you mentioned, of course, worked at UKC after I was gone. And then Carrie has done several podcasts with me. I always enjoy having him, Corey, with me because he's a good conversationalist. He's got a lot of knowledge. He's a hard worker, and he's got vision, for things like this. And I know you have a lot of members that are like that, and I don't want to single Corey out, but always appreciated him, and he has kind of kept me informed about what's going on over there with your club. And then there's a national treasure there in Pennsylvania in the person of Fred Moran. We call him the Redbone Man. Have you ever had the privilege of meeting him?
I have not met him, but I've heard of him.
Yeah. Well, when you meet him, you won't forget him. That's for sure. And I need to call Fred. It's time to get him on another podcast. He wasn't feeling the best. He's well into his 80s. He still coon hunts most every night. He loves the Redbone breed. And as I say, he's a national treasure. I want to ask you just a little bit about your little plot female now. How old is she now?
She's 10 months this month. She'll be turning 11 months at the end of the month there.
Have you done anything in the field with her, or mostly just the bench showing?
No, I've got her out. I've got her out in some pleasure hunts. I've got her out in some club buddy hunts. She goes, yeah. She doesn't stay at my feet ever. So she's a goer. I've had some interesting stories, and a good one is after we were having a club buddy hunt, and after one of our meetings, and my dog goes, and two dogs were kind of hanging around. Those guys were moseying along, and then another dog that had just got back from Worlds. It ran itself into an electric fence, so it made its way back to us. So I got the only dog out hunting. Well, she's going, and I call her treed, and everyone else is like, "Oh, okay." And she was pretty far out, and so we go to walk to her, and she gets quiet. So we're like, "Oh, okay, whatever, we'll wait." Well, I checked the Garmin, and she hasn't moved for 5 minutes or so. So we're like, "Oh, well, we better get there. She's quiet and hasn't moved. That's odd." Well, when we show up, we get there, and there's my tracking collar sitting on someone's front porch. No dog. So, they come out and they're like, "Yeah, she was squealing under that tree over there in our yard. We thought this thing was shocking her. We took it off, but as soon as we tried to get a hold of her, she squirmed away and went back to the woods." So she kept hunting. She kept hunting. So I caught up to her that night, and that was one of my early learning lessons. And
well, that one you kind of were in a catch-22 because they took the collar off of her. It wasn't your fault that you couldn't find her,
No, but they taught me early at the club. You don't need the tracking system. You need to learn to listen to the dog.
That is great advice for anybody out there that is a newcomer to this sport. That Garmin or dog trail or whatever it is a great tool, and you're going to value it highly down through the years. But if you want to be a coon hunter and a good one and realize all the great things about the sport and be able to think your way through situations, you need to listen to the dog. Absolutely great advice. Great advice. Well, Nate, I think we're going to wrap this thing up. I'm sure this old raspy voice of mine's been grating on the guy's ears for a while here, but to be able to look back at the history, of this great sport, and it's a very rich history, and being that you've chosen Plots, the first winner of Autumn Oaks in 1960 was a Plot hound. So that's a bit of history there that we can pass along. Well, what do you call your Plot pup?
Her name's Saddle Up Cowgirl. Easy money.
Easy money, huh?
Well, because I won her with just $10 is all it took to get her.
Well, that's great. They don't all come that cheap.
No, certainly not ones this good. They certainly don't.
Well, you've got some good Plot guys there around you. Corey, you mentioned. Keith Pierce is another one that's got good dogs. And of course, Mr. Scheninger, Bill, has been on the podcast 2 or 3 times, and they don't come any finer than him. And so I'm really excited about the future with your Plot, and I hope to get you on the podcast again, and we can talk about all the coons she's been treeing.
Oh, absolutely. I'll have more stories ready for you.
Okay. Well, Nate Hickson from Mercer. I gave your town a new name. From Mercer, Pennsylvania, has been our guest here this week on Gone to the Dogs at the Races. Hope you've enjoyed our discussion about water races and field trials, an important aspect of this great sport of coon hunting. Until next time, this is Steve Fielder, your host. And if anyone asks you where I am or what I'm doing, you just say, he's gone to the dogs.